So we are live on Substack right now, and we're in the recording studio. So we're going to be laying down an episode for the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast. So I welcome everybody that's going to tune in live to interact and interface with me. Never know what will end up on the podcast episode. And that would be the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast. So great morning, Lori, always here. Great morning, Amanda. Feel free to say hello and interact with us during this episode that I'm calling the Omen Frequency. This is a really, really cool, fresh new perspective to use today as you look to put your conditioned program mind on pause just for a little bit. So he's going to be there. You can go right back to your regularly scheduled program and let the powers that be call the shots. But we're just going to take a moment here today and pause that computer from booting up and claim control of that frontal cortex of ours by entertaining some things that make us go, And we're going to play with what we call the Omen frequency today. So as a reminder, for those of you watching live or for those of you that will watch this recording, we are really, really having fun with this new show that we started called The Writer's Way. And that is specifically for Substack, where we're just going out there and finding up and coming writers in the digital writing platform, the online writing platform known as Substack. And, from small to, on their way to success to highly successful. Today, we're going to be interviewing an amazing, very, very successful Substacker that has thousands and thousands of people following her. And she just does wonderful stuff in the health arena. So that's something that's going to happen live today, I think at about like noon or 12:30. You'll see the advertisements for that. So great morning, everybody. And as people come and join us live, just recognize that what we're going to be doing right now is recording a podcast episode called the Omen Frequency. And this will probably drop in like 2 weeks or so on the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast. Great morning, Monica. Great morning, Ellie Jill Dornick, my mother. But yeah, we're gonna record a really nice podcast episode. So like I said, sometimes if we have a nice organic discussion, maybe you have some questions or some distinctions that are relevant to it, I'd be happy to put that on the episode and shout you out. But without further ado, let's have some fun with what I call the Omen frequency. I hope you'll enjoy it. So this is the Omen frequency. I think I made that up. Pretty sure. I mean, I didn't make up the words omen and frequency, but I think I made up the concept of looking at it this way. And I call this the hidden channel where life's messages come through. So it starts off like this. Let's just entertain this concept. Is it a coincidence that you're here with me this morning? Whether you're listening to a podcast or watching this as a live on Substack, is it a coincidence? Do you think it's a coincidence? Or was it something that you had planned and you felt like you control it? But I would entertain the idea of looking at who else is here right now. What else is going on that you didn't plan for? So it's kind of a fun space to just look at that idea of saying, how much of life is a coincidence? How much of it am I in control of, and how much have I planned? And is there more? Is there more? I love entertaining the idea that it's got to be more than this, right? I always like to look at the spaces where things are typically not observed. When I was a kid, I always loved to watch movies and look at the extras in the back rather than just the main character, that kind of thing. So imagine for a second living your whole entire life with a radio that's besides you, and you're faithfully tuned into a station that you were pretty much told to listen to. So the voices, the noise, the programming, they all seemed normal on this station because everyone else was tuned into that station too. But you you come to discover at some point in your life, and it may be right now, and it might have happened already, you come to discover that all along there's another signal broadcasting on this radio. And it's kind of like underneath and in the background. It's like a frequency that's custom made for you in the universe. And that frequency is trying to broadcast something that has the key to unlock all the mysteries and big questions of your life. So that is what I call the omen frequency. And we'll explain what an omen is in a second. So the omen frequency, and the word frequency is really cool, isn't it? What frequency are you tuned into? What vibration are you vibing at? So the omen frequency carries meaning through patterns, symbols, disruptions, and chance encounters that we may have seen as things that are already unfolding all around us. So do you ever take note of those things? Maybe you have a lucky number. Maybe it's a color. Maybe it's a song, right? So the omen frequency is this space, this channel where all of those things are happening. So entertain that. So they're not rare and they're not random. They're just at times unnoticed because you weren't tuned into the frequency through which it's been trying to reach you. Why? Because you've been tuned into the frequency that you were brought up and raised to tune into, that radio beside you. Great morning, Matthew. Hello to people showing up. So understanding this frequency requires knowing the difference between synchronicities and omens. Now, as a side note, my book that's going to launch in February of 2026 makes sense. There's a whole element and chapter that lays the foundation for what I call the 10 synchronicities that have shown up in my life that actually turned into insights and omens. So a great portion of my book are these 10 stories of things that actually transpired, very much like The Alchemist, that for whatever reason I took note of and then I gave meaning to. And they became insights and omens in a second. We'll see. So understanding this frequency requires knowing the difference between synchronicities and omens. So synchronicities are those strange alignments that seem to happen, those chance meetings, repeating numbers, and coincidences, or we call them that, right? That for whatever reason catch our attention. That's what a synchronicity is. How you met somebody could be that way. So they're the raw and wild events, the signals that, like transmissions, seem to break through the static of your conditioned mind. I always wonder when I notice something, not only why did I notice it, but how did it break through my conditioned mind, my ego, and my protective force field around me? Because I always wonder, why do I let certain things in and with some sort of cognitive bias block certain things out? So that always makes me go, right? So they're the raw and wild events, the signals that, like transmissions, break through the static of your conditioned mind. An omen, however, so that's a synchronicity. An omen is what happens when you take that synchronicity, that thing that you take note of, and you interpret it. You interpret the signal. It's the meaning that you associate, the guidance that you sense, and the message that you receive when you lean in with open curiosity. So I think it was Carl Jung that referred to synchronicities as meaningful coincidences. So that's the space that we're playing in right now. And I just want to remind you, and I want to bring this to light right now. While we're having this discussion, if you're paying attention, and I am, what you're doing is you're using that part of your brain that you control, right? That part of your brain that you use when you tilt your head and you look up and you think. That's you, not the lower levels that are running the rest of the 95% of the day. So that's where we're at right now. So if you come with me and you contemplate and dispute some of these things, obviously I haven't made up my mind yet about anything. I'm just pointing some interesting things out. You're using your prefrontal cortex. So you're in control right now. So if synchronicities are signs, if we were to look at synchronicities as signs that show up, The omens represent the significance of the signs. So how could I put that if I'm traveling down the road and I see a sign, but it has nothing to do with where I'm going, then it would just be something that I would pass by. But if I see a sign and it carries a certain number or a phrase, or maybe it's indicating where I'm turning, then it becomes something that I give meaning to. Make sense? So synchronicities and omens cannot be experienced through logic alone. We can't move through the world using just like rationale and logic, although that helps, right? But that's part of our conditioned program mind. And our conditioned mind is conditioned to see certain things and not see certain things. So if you want to experience and see synchronicities and experience omens, you can't do that with logic alone. They must be intuitively felt. So if you look at your senses, you've got your five senses, we would talk about the sixth sense. It's got to go a little further than just that. But intuition, right? That gut feeling, that weird thing, that space where you go, and choose not to pass something by. So check this out. Pay attention to this. This is a wonderful, wonderful thing to check out for the day. In the ancient Greek times, one of the ways that the ancient Greeks would get signs and messages or answers to their questions, their big questions about life, is they would simply go to the marketplace. So they would pass through the gate. This is fascinating. They would pass through the gate of the marketplace, and then they would walk up to one of the statues of one of the various gods. They'd walk up to the statue, and with their hand, they would go and whisper their question, where nobody would hear it, into the ear of the statue. Then, after they did that, they would be seen putting their hands over their ears to cover their ears and shut out all outside noises as they walked back outside of the gate of the market. So they would whisper their question, cover their ears, and probably try to not look at anything as well, and walk out of the gate of the market. And as soon as they would pass through the exit of the market, they would uncover their ears. And it was said that the first sounds that they heard, whether it was overhearing a conversation, or maybe even the singing of a bird, or maybe the sounds of leaves moving about, whatever it would be, that would be accepted as the all powerful oracle's answer to their question. Isn't that fascinating? It was believed that once you set a clear intention and put yourself into a frame of mind, you would receive its message. The universe would speak to you and guide you. Isn't that cool? Have you ever done something like that? Have you ever trusted the universe so much that you allowed it to give you the answer to your biggest questions? Now, think about what logic and rationale would say. It plays in the realm of what you see is what you get. So, very often when we ask questions like, what's the meaning of life? We use what we see as what we get with that question. We're talking about a different space. That's the omen frequency, right? So the omen frequency then would represent the space where these patterns and signals no longer appear random and chaotic, but organized, intentional, and meaningful. So it's this awareness in this space that life is speaking to you. Do you ever feel like life is speaking to you and trying to tell you something, that you're being guided? You ever feel guided? And that what once felt like a coincidence now starts to make sense. You start to piece everything together. If you like that sort of thing, that's what my book is about in large part. So it's not something that you create. You can't create the omen frequency, but something that you awaken to. I always say that I like to empower myself every day with the weapon of awareness. I just think one of the most valuable things a human can do is just to become aware. So we awaken to it. It's something that already exists that we weren't tuned into. And once you awaken to this frequency where these things live, you can't unsee it. That's the thing. Once you experience some sort of augmented reality where you realize there's more going on, you can't unsee it. You can't proceed through life ignoring it anymore. But you could try. So it's the awareness that life's not random, in fact, that you are not lost, and that every step delay and disruption that you experience in life may be carrying a message. What a fun way to go through life. So, my personal awakening, I mean, I've had so many awakenings. Great morning to you, the seventh signal. Love some of these names on Substack. So, I had my own personal awakening. Before my awakening, I kind of like wondered if this stuff was, but my logical mind, my conditioned mind said, "Hey, don't spend too much time on that. Get real. Let's be realistic." Well, I stopped being realistic once I had my awakening. So there's a passage, and if you haven't read The Alchemist, I mean, it's just a delicious book to read, and it really sheds some really nice color. Paulo Coelho wrote this book, and it just sheds a lot of color on this discussion. Um, but a passage in The Alchemist that I would say never left me. So it's when Santiago, the main character, begins to understand that everything around him, the wind, the sand, the stranger's words that he would hear or overhear, is speaking a language that he was never taught to understand. Yet for some reason felt familiar. And that's not the language of words, but that would be the language of omens. So this is where the omen frequency is. So think about that. What language were you taught to speak and learn and understand? This is a different language. That's why it seems unfamiliar and maybe unrealistic to you. But there's this intuition that comes up. Maybe it's like deja vu or something like that, where you start to go, that's weird. And your conditioned mind will have you go back to your default mode and just say, well, just block it out, because it means if you start entertaining some of these things, it might mean that your whole house of cards falls down, right? So this changes everything. So for most of my life, and I would assume yours as well, before I had some sort of an awakening, I was tuned into the wrong frequency. I wouldn't say the wrong frequency because I thought it was the right frequency, but that would be the channel of things like survival, achievement, proving, fixing things, right? Trying to be right. So I was so busy following that broadcast, listening, absorbing, and practicing that broadcast, that I never noticed the deeper signal that was playing underneath until I was forced, to stop and retune. So that's another interesting thing, is sometimes we get little tickles and wrinkles, in the matrix. We start to see some incongruencies, or we got these opportunities to kind of like ponder something, but we typically just move past them and don't really investigate too much. But the way life works is sometimes where these little windows of opportunity open up, um, you'll either walk away and hope that the window just closes itself, but sometimes life has this way of forcing you through the window, if you know what I mean. So I would often get glimpses of this frequency when I experience things like deja vu, right? I mentioned that before, or maybe witness a strange event that would unfold, or find myself bumping into interesting people that prove to be extremely meaningful in life. I mean, how many times have you also gotten out of your car in a parking lot and seen like a family of three, and then like 3, 4 hours later, they're sitting next to you in a restaurant? Do you ever notice those things, and do you think that they mean anything, or do you just go, huh? Right? So that's kind of the way I started looking at my life. So the station that I was tuned in, like most of us are, would chalk those things up when I would see them as coincidences. So the word coincidence is an interesting word. What does it mean to you? Because if you look at Carl Jung, he says he refers to synchronicities as meaningful coincidences, which means you're entertaining the meaning of them rather than just writing them off as a coincidence. Because you're going to have coincidences today, and you're going to be able to decide whether or not they mean something. Isn't that interesting? Great morning to my friend, Diary of a Relationship Coach. Good to see you here. But for whatever reason, me and probably you, I started to become curious. Were these things were these coincidences random, or were they potentially exposing some sort of a glitch in the matrix, or maybe a wrinkle in time? I'm fascinated with that idea. And I get to choose to be fascinated with that idea. That's an interesting thing when somebody says, that's crazy what you're saying. I mean, I could easily say, well, that's crazy that you're not entertaining it. But what's fun about life is we can't prove things don't exist, right? We could try, but this idea like that the world is a simulation, right? You can't prove that it's not. You can try, but you can't. So I like to entertain what's going on and look at it from different vantage points. So I became open and curious and began to seek out a more profound truth. Now, this is what a a scientist would do. What's interesting about scientists is they don't need to be right, unlike most humans. Scientists actually love when another scientist proves their theory wrong, and with proof, scientific proof in their case, says this is more right. Scientists get excited about that. Scientists don't need to be right. They're just seeking a more profound truth. So I love that. So for those of you, it's a bit controversial, but a moment of clarity that I had, and I'm gonna share something about this experience that I had the first time with plant medicine. But what's relevant for those of you that have never done something like that is I just made a distinction and a correlation that you could do without this. But I first experienced plant medicine and I went deep into the Amazon jungles of Peru. And this is about 5 years ago. And that's when everything that I thought that I knew began to dissolve. That's what's interesting. I was pushed through the window in that point. That's what plant medicine has a tendency to do. So the experience, what it did was it cracked something open in me. And in that vulnerable openness, I met what in plant medicine world they would call her. And that is what plant medicine enthusiasts or people that sit with it call the grandmother. And, I won't get too far into that, but it wasn't a hallucination, just for in case you're wondering and you're curious. She was actually like some sort of a guide that showed up. And I didn't know she was that it had anything to do with the medicine. It was what it was. She was a guide, like some sort of spiritual intelligence. And it was like a sacred force that didn't speak in words, but just like knew, like she was able to communicate with me without words, right? So she was the voice of the jungle. That's what was explained to me, the keeper of the medicine. But she was some sort of a wise spirit, as I remembered it, who appeared to guide me through what I felt like was a lifetime of memory, truth, and awakening. So I had that experience, and what that did was that exposed me as if I put on like augmented reality glasses and that gave me the ability to see what else was going on. That's very interesting because when you're on plant medicine, you don't feel different, but things are different. It's not like some sort of a drug that makes you feel like, woo. It's not about that. But all of a sudden, you start talking to things and come to realize that most people can't see those things. I guess it's like some sort of a pleasant version of some sort of, you know, mental challenge or something like that. So um, I was reminded, by with The Alchemist. I'm obsessed with the book The Alchemist. So in Paulo Coelho's story, not because the grandmother handed me some sort of gold or told me my future, but because what she did in that experience, she taught me how to acknowledge and how to tune in, how to see. That's what's interesting about it. And that's what The Alchemist is about, is exposing something, but also teaching you to become open and curious about seeing it and more and more. This is when I started to unveil this idea of the omen frequency. So I was exposed to what I refer to as the language of life, like the symbols, the cycles, and the synchronicities that were going on that I normally was not tuned into because of the other radio station. So I tuned in to see everything around me was alive. Right? I stopped looking right in front of me and I started looking at the big picture and noticed that everything was alive and trying to communicate something. I realized there were some messages all over the place that were for me that I hadn't previously seen, right? And it was overwhelming at first, to be honest with you, because life is very, very ordinary when you first experience, you realize how ordinary life is when you experience the extraordinary. So it was overwhelming at first. I felt as though I had woken up after like being in a coma for years. and everyone around me was trying to catch me up on what had happened while I was asleep. Make sense? So then I kind of settled in and accepted the fact that I could spend the rest of my life deciphering it all. Right. So I kind of let myself off the hook. So the grandmother, that experience didn't give me any answers, but what it did, and this is the insight, is it invited me to remember and to acknowledge and entertain other things. And that's what I'm really trying to convey here with this idea of this other frequency where things like synchronicities and omens take place. And I don't know how you're going to receive this. I know that whenever I talk about something controversial like this, especially on Substack, I get a lot of people that like say, "What are you talking about? This is crazy. This is heresy." And I understand. I understand. I mean, I would assume that like entertaining an alternative perspective and truth could be looked at as a big threat. So I get it. I get it. I spent most of my life. But I just remember that everything started connecting. And then I realized that everything is connected, that the signs, these synchronicities are always there. They don't disappear. They're always there. And the answers that we're seeking in life are often hiding right in plain sight behind things like discomfort, right? So, I mean, we know that the obstacle is the way. They were hiding behind things like discomfort or behind some sort of frustrating distraction, behind the noise of the default mode station that we are always listening to. So, think about what you do when noise comes into your life. What you have a tendency of doing is moving away from discomfort, noise, frustration, and things that you don't like, right? Unusual challenges and stuff like that, inconveniences. And the reason why we do is because it's just logical to do so. And we just revert back to our default mode station, even though we know that it's kind of like a mediocre way of living life. But hey, you know, accept what you got. You get what you get and you don't get upset. So that night in the jungle for me, from my awakening, I didn't see just visions. What I did was I saw my life through a new lens. And that's what the big takeaway was for me because I could take that lens anytime. That's why I wear these glasses without lenses in them. It's because I like to play with the idea of seeing things the way I choose. So it's kind of like this augmented world where you allow yourself and to entertain what else is there. Now, it might not show up as like some sort of a snake or a cheetah walking by you, but imagine how valuable this idea would be the next time somebody confronts you or says something that triggers a stress response and it upsets you. And you put these glasses on and you entertain what else might be true. So it might not be about like seeing objects or different types of matter. It might just be about you allowing yourself to entertain different perspectives in life, alternative perspectives in life. So that's what I had learned there. So it was like an augmented world, like it's some sort of dimension underneath the surface of everyday experience. And I think you know that that exists. I don't know where you're at in your life and whether or not you're willing to admit it, but this is a place where everything is intentional, sacred, and I like to say laced with meaning. I like to look at like what's the lace of meaning in that. So it's a place where omens don't just show up. They've actually been there waiting the whole time for you to show up and take note of them in that space. So that would be a choice. So integration is a big part of any big experience. When you go to a seminar or a plant medicine retreat or maybe even hear a big distinction like this, what you have to do is you have to go through the process of integrating it into your baseline reality, your normal life. So since then, that experience, I've carried that vision with me. I've stayed tuned into a different frequency. So I do work, I do meditation, I do breath work, I do all this stuff. I speak about this stuff. I write on Substack. A lot of that is my way of practicing staying in that frequency. So I've tuned into a different frequency now, not just the normal one. The normal one wants me back. And I go back sometimes. It isn't exclusive to the jungle, by the way, in this medicine, but available here and now. It's available to all of us. It's part of the rhythm of daily life. It's a subtle at first thing, but if you're paying attention, it's unmistakable. And that if you're following along right now and you're listening, the chances are is it's becoming more and more real. And it could be a scary thing for you, but that's only because of the station that you were listening to that taught you that anything outside of it is scary. So the process of integration becomes one of the learning tools that we have to do various things to tune into this frequency and resist the gravitational pull back to the default mode. So that place that we're looking to tune into, that station, is what I call the Omen frequency. And it's the field of awareness that opens up when you just stop rushing through life and start becoming still and just listening. And when you're tuned into it, what it does is it allows you to sense a deeper purpose behind your challenges, behind your relationships, your delays, and your desires. Everything begins to make sense or more sense, and it just feels right, even the bad things. So you begin to realize that you're not alone. I don't feel alone. Do you feel alone? If you feel alone, you're not tapped into this frequency. Because when you're tapped into this frequency, you realize everything's connected and everyone is connected. So you're not alone. And the universe is always there guiding you. Sometimes you just don't look, right? I always think it's funny. Well, I shouldn't say funny, but it's interesting, this whole concept of praying for things. And I think that a lot of it has to do with you thinking that the universe is going to give you things. But I think the universe gives us our breath and our heartbeat every morning and gives us the answers to all of our questions, just like the statue in the market, in different ways. We're just not open to it. So if you were to remove your hands from your ears when you wake up in the morning and just look around, you might start noticing that the answers to your questions are right in front of you, and they were yesterday as well. So your job is to become available to these things. So integration, once you kind of start to experience this omen frequency, like I said, you can't unexperience it. Yet the pull of the comfortable known that you spend most of your life is real, right? So when you go back into your real world after this episode here, you might have some sort of confrontation or conflict or something like that. It's real. And therefore, one must accept the challenge of doing the work, right? Most of what we desire in life is on the other side of work. And that's where we look to, make the once unknown our new known, our new normal, right? And that's where, we can begin living some sort of an extraordinary life, and you get to decide what that is. I just want everybody to know, I don't have any idea how you should live or the way you should think, because your situation is unique to yourself. I just think about those things in terms of myself. I just like to point out what might be. I love the word might. So your new normal, this idea of living an extraordinary life, it takes commitment, work, openness, vulnerability, and grace, the stuff that we wish we didn't have to do. It's very inconvenient to live an extraordinary life, but it's there. Anybody can have it. But the delicious juice on the other side of it is definitely worth the squeeze. And you need not do this alone because there's many others. Okay. So we have integration groups and we have powerful things that, we work with and documents and all that stuff. Um, and over time, you realize after doing the work that there actually is no destination. This stuff, the work is actually what becomes a way of life. So that's why I have a morning routine. You guys are all welcome to it. If anything I ever talk about, just ask for it. I have all of these. I have a morning routine, and I have all these strategies and structures. A lot of it is in our what we call our Make Sense Academy, and that's a group of people that are open and curious, but committed to this kind of thing. So if you're interested in that, feel free to just reach out and say, make sense me. So you no longer wait for the world to tell you who you are. You listen inward rather and observe outward. You're being guided, I believe, not in some sort of fantasy sense, but through every wrinkle, coincidence, and challenge that has ever crossed your path. I believe those things are there for you. They're not happening to you, they're for you. You don't control the timing of this stuff. Don't try to control the omen frequency. You're just allowing yourself to sit in the space of it. You don't control the timing, but you learn to trust the rhythm of this frequency. And that is where purpose lives, not in some distant destination, but in your ability to see clearly what is already happening and respond with open curiosity and assignment. So you don't have to go out there and find your calling. Maybe you just have to stop ignoring it. That's powerful, isn't it? You don't have to go out there, try to find your calling and purpose. Maybe today the lesson is that we just have to stop ignoring it. What if it's already broadcasting to you? So it's been calling you the whole time, I think. So my thoughts on this always begin with a What if the reason that you feel stuck is not because you're faulty or off course or not worthy, but because you've forgotten how to listen? What if it was that simple? All of your frustrations and challenges and confusions are all just sitting on the side of being dissolved if you just start to listen and entertain alternative perspectives other than the one that's broadcasting from this channel that everybody's listening to. So, what if the signals that you've labeled as setbacks, distractions, or failures were actually some sort of an initiation process? Isn't that cool? Great morning, Bear Sage. Let me read some of these things. There's an underlying roller coaster to life. Yes, Matthew, that's great. But we're all the meaning makers of the roller coaster. Isn't that true? Thank you for this important and potent message from Diary of a Relationship Coach. Yeah, love this stuff. So, what if the signals that you've labeled as setbacks, distractions, or failures were actually just some sort of initiation process? And what if the wisdom that we're all seeking isn't something that we go find, but something that we actually remember? What have you forgotten about? What is something that was in the known that is now in the unknown because you've conditioned yourself with this algorithm like consumption that causes your assumption? I don't think you're lost. I think maybe you're just not listening. So my message is let's tune in. And thank you for tuning in. So that's it for today. This will live on Substack, and I hope that you'll subscribe to the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast. If you want information on the Make Sense Academy, just message me through one of the various channels. And we thank and love and appreciate those that support our paid subscription, which is $8 a month. They get daily, which I'll record right now for them. They get a daily morning message, a vlog, and a lot more cool stuff coming down the pipe. Just a way of us saying thank you. So we just increased that premier or premium content for the paid subscribers because they help keep the lights on. So love and appreciate you. Bear Sidge says, so excited to work with you, my friend. Love that, love that we'll have to rewatch this. Okay, so he just came in at the end. Yeah. So you'll have to watch this. So remember, if you learned something today, give it away. That's how it's going to stay. That's how you take what you learned today and put it into the arena of play, right? And you make it your own. So love and appreciate you, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye now.